Everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So, I'm celebrating the release of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker in the best possible way with a nice cup of tea. Classic British way to celebrate the release of the final instalment in the Skywalker saga and the ninth overall Star Wars movie in that saga, not including the various spin-offs like Rogue One and solo Star Wars stories. So, no doubt many of you have already seen it. To acknowledge those who haven't yet seen it, I won't go too much into the plot. I won't spoil anything. Suffice to say that JJ Abrams returns to co-write and direct his second Star Wars movie following The Force Awakens, which was, of course, that was the movie in 2015 that triumphantly resurrected the spirit of the original trilogy after George Lucas's much maligned and deservedly so prequels. And in between The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, we of course had Rian Johnson's film The Last Jedi, which proved divisive to say the least. So what this new movie is tasked with, it's tasked with an awful lot actually, not only with resolving this trilogy, but also the overall sweep of 9 movies that began back in 1977 with A New Hope, which was the movie that introduced us to Luke, Han, and Leia. And obviously various other assorted characters as well. So an awful lot riding on this sort of trilogy capper and also saga capper as well. There really isn't any point in me trying to revisit the plot anyway. Suffice to say that if you have been invested in the storyline so far, you have a sort of emergent Jedi, Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, who of course discovered that she was strong with the Force in The Force Awakens. She then sought out the fugitive Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill in The Last Jedi, who had sort of turned his back on the Jedi ways and said it's time for the Jedi to end. And all the while in the background there is this sort of brooding impending conflict with Adam Driver, who as Kylo Ren, who started off as, you know, the sort of the commander of the First Order, and then very controversially in The Last Jedi ascended to become the supreme leader of the First Order after unexpectedly killing his own master, Supreme Leader Snoke, played by Andy Serkis, which was one of many plot threads in The Last Jedi that got fans very angry, although critics were, you know, generally pretty pleased with it. So what you have is the kind of culmination of that sort of that arc in The Rise of Skywalker, plus the emergence of the thought to be dead Palpatine, played by Ian McDiarmid, whom we all thought met his end in 1983's Return of the Jedi when he was thrown into the Death Star reactor by Darth Vader, apparently not dead. I'm not going to go any further with the plot other than that. So what to say about the movie? Well, other than the fact that unfortunately I hate to end, you know, what is my final review of the year on a pessimistic note, but I found the film very disappointing for a number of different reasons. I think fundamentally the problems are that back when George Lucas sold his Lucasfilm rights to Disney, there was very quickly put in place a plan for a new trilogy, which started to take shape in 2013, 2014 with JJ Abrams, which then became the first film in this planned trilogy, then became The Force Awakens. Interestingly enough, at the same time, Rian Johnson was brought on board to write and direct The Last Jedi in 2014. But crucially, and I think this is where my problem with this new trilogy as it stands is, that when The Force Awakens came out in December 2015 and sort of triumphantly heralded the return of that kind of nostalgic, tactile Star Wars movie that was nothing like the prequels, which are horrible and digitized and ugly and stupid and filled with like bad acting and stiff dialogue. But the problem was when The Force Awakens came out, this overarching trilogy structure wasn't mapped out. They hadn't got the overall arc of the trilogy sort of mapped out. So what consequently has happened is you've had 3 individual movies that have kind of made it up as they go along, to quote Monty Python. So you have JJ Abrams starts it off with The Force Awakens. Rian Johnson then controversially decides to, you know, in the words of Kylo Ren, let the past die. And he tries to sort of wrench the fans away from the past and move them forward with The Last Jedi. With, you know, a lot of the fans are very angry, but, you know, Last Jedi took 1.3 billion, which is less than what The Force Awakens took, which is 2 billion, but clearly it was a fiscal success. Now, I think, unfortunately, what you have is basically in the form of The Rise of Skywalker, because you have a reaction to The The Last Jedi, or more specifically, you have a reaction to the fan reaction to The Last Jedi, which means that a lot of The Last Jedi's more controversial aspects, so I think some of which worked, some of which didn't, are now actively undone. They're basically wiped out, and this basically acts as a direct sequel to the tone and really the events of The Force Awakens. So what you subsequently have is a trilogy that does not hang together tonally, structurally, emotionally, and it's kind of frustrating, because I do kind of wish that The Rise of Skywalker had the courage of its convictions, and it basically did just continue what The Last Jedi did, which is, it's time to stop living in the past, and it's time to wrench ourselves forward, however hard that may be, in terms of the interpretation of Luke Skywalker, whatever. It's kind of necessary, because this trilogy, the saga, is now approaching its 50th birthday. I, as a Star Wars fan, and I am a Star Wars fan, I don't see any problem with that, but clearly a lot of fans did, and therefore what you get is kind of, in the form of The Rise of Skywalker, is less of a movie, and I think more almost like a sort of 2-hour fan fiction, really. I mean, it's crammed with so much memorabilia and faces and stuff and events and callbacks to the whole history of this franchise that it ceases to be a film in its own right, and the script doesn't make any sense. There's the key role of one particular character is actually not explained to any great length at all, which basically means that if you don't have that kind of structural and logical groundwork in place, the rest of the film gets sucked into an emotional black hole. I just don't care. If you can't be bothered to get those central tenets right, why am I supposed to care as a viewer as to what's going on? Because there is clearly like lazy script writing 101 going on here. There are also so many Deus Ex Machina plot developments. It's kind of like, right, or there's an object that will point us onto the next scene. A character will randomly walk in incoherently from one scene without you having known that they were there, and they'll sort of conveniently explain something. There'll be a bit of exposition that will suddenly emerge as if no one had thought of it, and then that'll take characters across the galaxy to go and see something else. And it's kind of like, it's very disappointing, because I like JJ Abrams movies. I like Chris Terrio. Chris Terrio wrote Argo. He won an Oscar for it. Admittedly, he did also write Justice League, but we'll part that. So I really, really wanted to like this more, and unfortunately, I think it is basically a rush to the finish, and it's a rush to basically try and keep the fans happy in the wake of the very, very divisive Last Jedi. I personally would rather they hadn't done that. I would rather that they tried to make this an idiosyncratic, memorable ending to both this trilogy and the saga. Unfortunately, I don't think they've done it. I think there are strengths. I think the actors do what they can. I think Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver are terrific, and that duality at the centre of the story between Rey and Kylo Ren has been the beating heart of this new trilogy. And I think it is interesting the way it kind of, it reflects the battles that have gone on earlier in the Star Wars saga. As we all know, Star Wars is about heritage. You have echoes of the past go throughout all of the films, and there is a lot of that going on. There are a lot of set pieces. I mean, pretty much it's wall-to-wall set pieces. It's very, very handsomely shot by Dan Mindel. Unfortunately, I think emotionally I went to the dark side. I wasn't stimulated. I wasn't particularly moved. One thing I will say, though, disappointed as I am that the saga has ended like this, I will say that I'm glad the film exists, because it allows John Williams to basically sign off from the saga as a whole. This is going to be his final Star Wars score, and I don't need to tell you that John Williams is a genius, and I think that the Rise of Skywalker score is terrific, and it's astonishing the way it interweaves all of these character themes across like 9 films. It's amazing. I made the point on Twitter that it is basically the 21st century equivalent of Beethoven's Ninth or Handel's Messiah. Just the musical complexity and the musical storytelling does so much emotional heavy lifting, even when the staging of individual scenes and the script just isn't up to standard. So what I will say is that John, this is for you. I think you're the real hero of Star Wars. I imagine a lot of other people feel the same way. I'm glad this film exists in order so that John Williams' music can exist, and so that he's able to round it off in style. So here's to you. And Happy Christmas, everyone. Let me know your thoughts on Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and I'll see you in 2020. Ta-ra!